Welcome to the Second Plan A podcast, where we dive deep into the art of navigating life's twists, turns, and sucker punches. I'm Amber Hoover. I'd rather stick to the plan.
And I am Ryan Hoover, and I don't even have a blah.
So today we are moving on to our Second Plan A. Solid Friends reference right off the bat. Love it. On this episode, we are tapping out to flawed logic and acknowledging that mixing critical thinking and reasoning with emotions won't get you fight ready. Are you ready to go?
Ugh, I guess.
That sounded like a lot.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lot when I came up with it,
I
but
think I'm going to have to really pay attention.
that one's heavy. I think you're going to enjoy it, though, as will our listeners/viewers. All right, so a logical fallacy is an argument that can be disproven through reasoning, as opposed to one that can be disproven with facts. So a logical fallacy may be factual, but it is flawed or deceptive in some way, which we typically like, but maybe not in our arguments. So these errors are part of a day-to-day life. You know, they exist among everyone, really. We aren't saying, oh, you shouldn't have this problem or you should be more logical than you are, but we're saying let's be aware of where we deviate from logic. And this will actually help combat confirmation bias, which we've talked about before in episode 6, where a cognitive bias like confirmation bias refers to an ongoing pattern of errors. A logical fallacy is more of a mistaken reasoning that occurs in a particular argument. That's what the internet says. Cognitive bias is like what we talked about with our confirmation bias as an example, and it's a pattern. And the internet says logical fallacies occur in the moment. I'd argue that if you are likely to use a logical fallacy or you use it once, you probably do have a pattern of using it across different parts of your life where arguments come up. So with that being said, I would like to start this episode with a logical fallacy that also leverages stereotypes.
Okay.
I know you're going to love this. There are 2 types of BJJ black belts: those who make it to their class on time and Brazilians. What do you think about that?
So first of all, I think another way to define a logical fallacy is just how people talk on social media.
Yeah. Wow, we're just attacking the entire internet right now. Good to go.
If you ever want examples, just pick
everywhere.
Any random post where somebody might want to argue, which is pretty much every post on social media, especially Facebook and YouTube.
Those are the popular. We have some references too within this episode that we're gonna call back to from Facebook for sure.
We could find brand new ones right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's pervasive, and I mean, again, I think you kind of alluded to this. We all do it to some degree, but I think it's that to some degree part.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
and at what level are these stakes?
Right. What are we really arguing about? What are we talking about? Is it something consequential or not? And I mean, that's the problem with social media is people will literally argue over anything,
which is so funny because the best thing you can do if you hate something or disagree with it is to ignore it, leave it alone, block the rest of the ads, because that's gonna punish the user so that they don't get a lot of views and a lot of comments. Otherwise, it's kind of the no such thing as bad press.
Yeah, all you're doing is supporting them.
Yes.
Any engagement is good engagement.
Yeah.
Good, and in quotation marks, but like we've kind of touched on this before, if I am putting out something to really get engagement, then I need the most fervent people on each side of the argument. And that's what's going to drive people to me. So you commenting negatively, if I am smart about it, and sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, I ignore it and subconsciously thank them for the engagement and move on, just like they should have done.
Right.
So yeah, it's like taking poison and hoping that the other person dies. All you're doing is poisoning yourself every time you engage with something that truly just you vehemently despise or oppose or disagree with or whatever. And not only that, but now you're going to see more of that stuff in your feed.
Yeah.
And it's going to drive you even more crazy.
So what this is tied back around. I thought you were just trying to escape my BJJ black belt conversation altogether, but it's coming back through. So the phrase I gave at the beginning, the example was a false dichotomy, where I show you a limited number of options, acting like those are the only two things available, but they aren't. I mean, there are plenty of black belts who don't make it to their class on times that aren't Brazilian, I'm sure.
For sure. Yes.
So we use these type of arguments, this false dichotomy, as a way to manipulate people to align with us.
Yeah. The most popular example that comes to my mind in my lifetime is right after 9/11. George W. Bush made a speech and basically said, and I listen, I wholly understand why he said it, but he basically said, you're either with us or you're against us. You know, and that was the rhetoric that I think America, I'm putting in quotes, needed at the time. But you'll hear that in life as well, you know, and listen, I can be with you 90% of the time, but 10%, like, no, we need to have a conversation about the things that you're talking about or doing or whatever. And if you're willing to, I guess, move on from a relationship because somebody doesn't support you 100% of the time, which is the false dichotomy that happens here, then you're going to run out of people really, really quickly. You know, you
run out of growth. I purposely put this fallacy first because it played so well off of our duality conversation. You can't live in these extremes. One, because they aren't representing your full spectrum of choices.
Right.
And two, because it's not tenable. So
that's why I went with bedroom Deadpool, because I feel like he more closely represents our duality.
Yes.
I'm the Deadpool and you're the
unicorn slippers. Oh,
bedtime.
I could use a nap.
The unicorn slippers and
bring it closer to the camera for our viewers. If you're
panda,
if you're driving right now,
this is bedtime Deadpool, and I am Deadpool and she is bedtime.
Off the rails. Can I at least be the unicorn slippers?
Sure.
All right, good, solid. Oh, I like the panda too. Okay, everything about bedtime. Never mind. I'm here for it. Yeah,
I know what I'm doing.
So the other side, but maybe not the other side, another way to use false dichotomies is actually against yourself. Something like, well, you know, if I went to jujitsu more, I'd be better. Okay, well, maybe. I mean, you might still suck. I don't know. That's not a true dichotomy, and you're putting so much pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
And it's not even logical. It's not reasonable to think that way.
Yeah, just going doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be better. I mean, that would be the same thing with anything. I mean, obviously the odds should increase.
Yes.
That you're going to get better by going. But if you put it in such stark terms, and I think it's also, again, we go back to kind of previous episodes, it's also a way for me to kind of absolve myself of some responsibility, because I can say, well, you know, he kicked my ass those 5 rounds because he comes 4 times a week and I'm only able to get here 2 times a week.
Yeah.
You know,
or it's because he's 70 pounds heavier than you and was a D1 wrestler in college.
It could be a whole host of things.
Yeah.
You know, and just trying to boil it down. People like things to be clean.
Yes.
And easy. And again, you know, I think life is mostly in the gray, but we have this want to put things in very clearly defined boxes.
Yeah.
And they typically happen on one end of the scale or the other. And those are the most obvious and the most vocal. And that's what you see on social media. Again, you know, it's the people that feel very, very strongly one way or another, whether they know why they do or not, or whether they actually have reason to, because of things we've discussed in the past. They are the loudest, so they get the most attention.
Yeah. So you said, you know, my phrase was, if I went to jiu-jitsu more, I'd be better. And you were like, well, if you went to jiu-jitsu more, the odds are that you have a better chance of improving. Yep. And now that's just a much longer sentence. Why don't we go, start, finish, get there faster. But the reality is the journey is the destination kind of thing. You can't just skip all those things in between, all those other influences. But I know I'm like cheesing super hard because I'm so excited that you said things the way they did. We want to take a mental shortcut. And typically that goes from plausibility to probability. We want to look at things, well, if I go to BJJ more, I'm probably better.
Right.
Rather than thinking, okay, well, but what's the full picture? What might actually happen? And it can work both ways too. It might go from the probability of this seems pretty clear, but is that plausible? And in our life, we see that dichotomy, duality, maybe, between feasibility and possibility. Just because it's possible to do something doesn't mean it's feasible. Just because it's probable doesn't mean it's plausible. There's still so much gray between that. And when we try to make these shortcuts is where we end up with these logical fallacies.
Well, I literally just had a conversation last week with a student that came to me after a class and said, in December, I will have been here a year. I don't feel like I'm progressing the way that I should be progressing in jiu-jitsu. I feel like...
I was ready to blame this on you, but that one's on me. Okay, keep going.
I feel like when I'm drilling, I understand the moves and the techniques, but then I can't perform them in live roles, and I'm just trying to survive.
Ooh.
And I said, yes.
Good. Yes. That's fantastic. You're trying to survive? That's perfect.
You are about a third of the way in to that first part of the journey. But again, wanted nice, clean, easy boxes and had set some expectations based on what I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And probably they weren't founded in anything true or factual in terms of, unless he went online and did, I said he, I don't know if we had discussed that, but this person went online, did the research, scoured every article, personal blog, journal, peer-reviewed study they could ever find about the jiu-jitsu journey to figure out if they're, or they could have asked us, and he did ask you, and you were like, no, that's great. You're trying to survive. You can drill. That's
You're right
fantastic.
On track.
You are perfect. A year in, you can't do anything. Perfect. You're doing great.
And honestly, like in this particular case, there are other things outside of just jiu-jitsu that this individual could work on that would help their jiu-jitsu. And we had that conversation as well. But it was easier to just say, well, I'm not progressing at a rate I feel like I should. Do I need to come to more jiu-jitsu, or do I need to do something else?
Yeah.
Instead of, well, what if we look at diet? What if we look at fitness levels? What if we look at the quality of reps you're getting? What if we look at who your partners are? What if we look at, are you getting here on time? Are you staying for the rolls every time? What else is going on around this?
So what might have gone on here is a conjunction fallacy to a degree. So this idea that the conjunction fallacy is the probability of two things happening cannot exceed the probability that each individual thing occurs. And so I'm going to give you the generic typical example that's most famous, and then we're going to apply it out to what's happening here.
Okay.
So it's typically referred to as the Linda problem, where
Linda.
Listen, Linda. So Linda is, she's going to school. She's active in groups that are related to women's rights, and she is big on her campus for promoting equality and equal pay for women. And all we know is that she's in school, and this is what she's doing in school. Okay. And so then some of the options are, is Linda a bank teller? Is she B, a bank teller and in the feminist movement? And then, whatever other options, of course. And the tendency, the want, is to pick that second one, because there's a high probability based on what we do know about her, the things she was active in college, that she would also be active in those feminist movements as well outside of college. But just because there's that high probability there doesn't make it any more probable that she's a bank teller. So how is it possible that it's actually both things, over just the one?
Yeah.
And so if we think about jujitsu, well, I go to jujitsu and I come to classes and I'm paying attention, I'm doing the drills and I'm struggling and rolling. And then we try to come up with our A-B choices.
Right.
If we're trying to say, well, you're good at jujitsu and something else is occurring at the same time, you're starting to attack and live rolling and you do this, those are a lot of things to happen at the same time.
Right.
When the reality is, we should probably be choosing choice A, I know more than I started.
Yeah.
Not I know more than I started and I'm attacking and using things that I learned in class in live rolling.
Right.
That
Well,
sort
it
of
goes
thing.
back. It goes back to the gain and the gap we talked about
Yes.
previously. But it's easy to overlook the gain and the gap when we start setting up these false realities.
This is where I should be.
Right. Yeah. Jiu-jitsu is interesting on a whole lot of levels, and it's very easy, I think, to fall into these little traps. And I don't mean like Kimura traps or
I mean,
whatever.
very easy for those, but also literally these logical fallacy traps, especially in your internal dialogue. Again, your narrative identity.
Yes.
Moving on to our next one.
All right. Did you know there's like hundreds of logical fallacies?
So
it's ridiculous.
Literally, I tried to look up a list. And so quick backstory, I looked up a list and hundreds. And I was like, oh man, I don't have the kind of time to go through all of these. No. And then I was trying to find the least common ones. And it was still just all over the place. I'm like, the filter on this is insane. Yeah. So if you're bored with maybe a 24-hour flight time, we have a job for you. But other than that, there are so many of these. I want to move on to straw man, because I'm ready to go on to the Facebook offensive here. And that's disproving an argument different from the one actually under discussion and not even recognizing or acknowledging that you're not talking about the same thing.
Yeah. I'm
going to let you take this one away because I know you're more involved than I am. I'm sitting there scrolling, eating my popcorn, like, this dude is a lunatic.
Yeah.
But I'm going to let you go for it.
Yeah, I think this one might be the most, this one and like whataboutism, I think tend to be the most common.
I was about to say, literally the other one that I put this idea into. We can talk about both.
That we see, it's like, I'm not sure it's attaching emotion to a thing.
Those emotions, man.
Yeah.
They get you all messed up.
I read a thing or I hear a video and I only read the parts or hear the parts that somehow seem relevant to me or strike a nerve with me. And I ignore the other 12 minutes of the video. And so the most recent one, and I don't want to pick on this dude, but the most recent one that comes to my mind immediately is the hands, body, feet fallacy video that I put out. And a guy, there were a couple of examples of this, but one guy started talking about fencing, and my off the cuff generic response was, okay, but I'm not really talking about fencing.
Apples aren't oranges.
Yes, he basically said, well, how do you explain blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, well, I don't, because I'm not talking about that.
Right.
And this went on for...
If it were one comment, right, I think I would be a little bit less worked up. But this person is so blind to this fallacy that if I had to guess, he's put "what about fencing" everywhere, or well, how do you explain it in fencing, right, or what about fencing? And I love that he loves fencing and is passionate about it.
Sure, I don't give a fuck about fencing,
but I'm
not talking about fencing. I have nothing against it. I think it's cool. But I don't care about it. I'm not talking about it. It has nothing to do. And when I say nothing to do, I mean absolutely nothing to do with the conversation at hand.
Mm-hmm.
But he is so bought in and sold and emotionally attached to this straw man argument that he cannot see or hear anything else. And it got to the point where I told you the other day, like, I don't know if he said anything else, but I'm kind of done with the conversation because he's not willing to listen outside of this. And really, there's not much for me to say. Yeah. I'm talking about one thing, you're talking about a completely different thing. What are we doing?
Right.
And I think straw man arguments, logical fallacies in general, but especially straw man arguments and whataboutisms, they have a heavy emotional attachment to them. I see a thing, I hear a thing, and somehow I connect it to a thing that I really like or love and feel attacked in some way.
Yes.
And so that's how I'm going to dig in.
And this is the hill I'm going to die on. And when I think about maybe things that I'm passionate about, I can see where you can get caught up in that.
Sure.
If somebody's out there saying women are weak and can't fight, well,
they are.
Ooh, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back after a word from the sponsors we don't have.
We'll never get at how
we're gonna get. I'm gonna be on that person. Like, I'm gonna get not on social media, honestly, but
because what's the point?
Because what's the point? But on my own channels, you better believe I'm gonna be raging against the machine on that one.
Well, and that's the thing, and that's what I tell people. Sometimes, a lot of times when I comment on these arguments that are clearly rooted in some emotional attachment to some fallacy, like the argument is not sound.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I will comment and initially as a way to try to make sure they understand what I'm talking about. Anything beyond that, if that didn't resonate, anything beyond that I comment is usually about a third party that might be reading it.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure that somebody from the outside sees this and understands what it is that I'm talking about. Now, sometimes, and less so these days, but sometimes I just want to fuck with them. But generally speaking,
it's the Deadpool part.
Yeah. But generally speaking, after my initial response, it's just about somebody else that might be reading in and truly doesn't understand and is willing to listen.
Yeah.
Because like the fencing guy, not willing to listen. Even in that same comment section, there was a guy that made an analogy to opening a door. And I'm like, hey, bro,
not what we're talking about.
That has absolutely nothing to do with what you are, with what I am talking about. And his passive aggressive response was, well, you're clearly the expert. Have a good day, or something like that.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
And I wanted to say, as a matter of fact, you are correct. And you may be an expert on opening doors, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, and it is confusing because if I'm teaching a class and I can relate something we're doing to the way they do something else,
yes,
that's going to help them make that connection.
We talk about that in coach classes. You should do that.
Yeah.
There has to be a logical connection, though.
Yes.
Opening a door has no logical connection to throwing a strong, powerful, fast punch or kick or whatever. Other than my hand is going to move at some point, my body is going to move at some point, my legs are probably going to move at some point. That's the extent of it.
I thought you were going to talk about beating someone with a door, maybe. And I just got a really funny mental picture. But I think it would still be a good bit of driving from your feet using your body.
If I was going to hit somebody with a door, it would definitely be not hands, body, feet.
Nope.
It would be probably impossible to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, at least at my size, I'm not going to swing a door with my arms first.
Yeah. Anyway, so we've discussed the false dichotomies fallacy, the conjunction fallacy, straw man. And within our straw man discussion, we used whataboutisms. And that lends itself more towards the red herring side of things.
Yeah.
Whataboutisms, and you should just be grateful as another key indicator that those are leading to something that is distracting from the relevant question. And I think fencing would work into both of these. And I moved it back and forth a couple times.
Well, whataboutisms, like, again, it's a way for people to draw attention away from the actual topic. And whether they're doing it on purpose or not, I don't know. Whether it's a conscious effort to do that, I don't know. But that's the result. When I introduce an argument or a topic that maybe is even tangentially related in some way, it still draws away from the actual thing that we're talking about. And usually one has nothing to do with the other.
Right.
It's a thing that I feel emotionally attached to. And so I'm going to interject it into this conversation, into a conversation that I might not even really understand. And that's the thing that I think we could all probably benefit from. If you don't understand what's happening, maybe just listen, maybe just read,
How dare you?
don't interject a thing. I'm never going to go on Neil deGrasse Tyson's
Star Talk.
Whatever. I'm never going to go on there and be like, yeah, what about, because I have
gravitational pull.
Yeah,
like I don't know.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And I don't have time for that. I don't have time to spend on frivolous arguments that don't matter at the end of the day.
Well, and if you are the expert, if you are Neil deGrasse Tyson and somebody says, what about something? You're just like, well, that's not relevant.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah. It's on that side of things, it's either it's a teachable moment, or it's let's just ignore this. Like there's one or the other. And realistically, most of that is going to be based on the receiver.
Yeah.
I can't really teach you anything. You can take whatever information I offer and decide how to use that or not. But I can't actually teach you something.
Do you ever comment with the logical fallacy somebody is using?
Of course.
I feel like I've seen you do that before, but it's been a minute.
Of course.
That's got to feel good.
Well, it's another way. It's another attempt to try to reach somebody. If the direct way doesn't work, and you truly want to try to make this person understand what you're trying to tell them, it's another way to try to reach them. If all of a sudden
hold up the mirror,
you turn the mirror around and let them see, this is what you're doing.
Saying,
how does it feel to you now? Does it make sense to you now that it's being put back on you? And I do think there's some value in it, but again, it's up to the receiver.
Of course. Another popular logical fallacy that I feel like we see a good bit is ad hominem, attack the person rather than the argument.
Yeah.
And in our current political climate, being weeks away from an election.
Oh, really? I didn't notice.
I know you can hardly tell. This is the political goldmine.
Yeah.
Rather than attacking the message, which is difficult to do in a 20-second commercial spot, well, I'm going to attack the person.
Yeah. My favorite one, the favorite dig that I used to get, and now I kind of wish I would get it more, was people would refer to me as young man in arguments. It was a way for them to say,
you don't know what you're talking about.
You don't know what you're talking about.
You don't have the experience.
But this was literally like in the past 10 years I was getting comments like this.
Was it when you shaved? Because that's on you.
But it was a backhanded way of making an ad hominem attack.
Yes.
It was a backhanded passive aggressive way to say, you don't know what you're talking about because you're not as old as I am.
Well, and that's what makes it so attractive as a fallacy, is it's so easy to confuse the message and the messenger.
Yes.
To try to put those two things together. And we actually have a conversation about this a good bit, usually the beginning of every fall, when some young, like 22-year-old quarterback is all of a sudden thrust into a spotlight.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh my gosh, he's terrible. And I can't believe he partied all night and ran his car into a tree, whatever. And it's like, what, because he was a first round draft pick? Right. You didn't think he was a dumb 22-year-old?
I mean, even like, they don't even have to be 22. Like,
sure.
They can be 30 and be on an NFL team. And, I will see comments, and, I've got friends that are in the NFL or were in the NFL. You'll see comments like, why was he out last night? He should have been reading a playbook. I'm like, okay, so you never leave your job? Like,
Yep.
you take your job with you 24/7? Stop. And I think that's where, again, if you can shine the mirror or turn the mirror back towards you, you understand a little bit better about how to empathize with somebody else. If you look at your actions, the things you say, the things you do in your daily life, as opposed to just shining lights on how other people, but that's, again, it's not comfortable. We don't like that. It puts us in a place where we might have to do something with that. Like, that seems
maybe
hard.
even acknowledge our own shortcomings.
Acknowledge them, and then once you acknowledge them, you either have to do something about them, or you have to admit, whether out loud or not, I'm okay with them.
Yeah.
I see shortcomings, I acknowledge shortcomings, and then whether I do something about them or I don't, I make a choice. And if I don't do something about them, the choice is I'm good with it. These are my shortcomings. I see them now. I've acknowledged them. I'm not going to do anything about it because I'm good with it. Most people would rather skip that whole process because we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we have to make that choice.
And those people are likely the ones who want to skip that process. Those are the ones who are going to see those similar problems, behaviors in other people and attack it. They're projecting. It's their internal guilt. And rather than face it myself, I'm gonna shine the light over on you.
It's always funny to me when I see comments on, especially like professional athletes, stories or whatever, whether it's MMA fighters or NFL players or whoever. People calling this guy or that guy or this girl, that girl a bum, or they suck or whatever, and I'm thinking, bro, they're a top 0.2% on the planet. And not to create a false equivalency or anything, but what have you done, my man? Like, what? You're sitting here on social media in the middle of the day trying to run down the performance of a person you don't know that has accomplished more than most people have by age 25, And again, like, you don't want to try to equivocate the two, but if that's the kind of
thing, if that's how you're establishing, this is how we're going to look at things.
Right. Yes.
Well, okay, but apply that everywhere.
You set that standard.
Yes.
Okay, now let's apply it across the board.
Right. Which is, I think, a fair way to, again, move outside of these logical fallacies and get outside of that confirmation bias, is to look at, well, okay, if I expand this thought process across other areas of my life, or I take that spotlight, turn it on myself, what does that look like?
If I'm going to hold others to a standard, I should be willing to hold myself to at least that standard, if not more, but at least that.
There was a great Ted Lasso quote about, I hope none of us are judged by our weakest moments or by our worst things. And I wish I had that full quote here, because it's strong, it's powerful. And we all have things in our past that didn't work out right. We're embarrassed by, whatever it is. And if we aren't judged by those moments, we maybe have a chance. And as society as a whole, have a chance at learning from them, growing, being a better person because of them. But if
President Bush had a similar quote, and he wasn't always known for being very articulate, but he had a similar quote that was actually really, really good. I won't try to repeat it now because I'll butcher it, but it was on a similar vein.
We'll look it up.
Yeah. But it's essentially, let's not judge people on their worst moments.
Right. So on that note.
But also, that said, there are some people worst moments that we absolutely should judge them on.
I agree. Extremes.
Right. I mean, we watched the thing last night, Rodney Alcala.
Yeah.
I'm going to judge that guy on his worst moments.
His worst moments were patterns, behaviors.
He was a serial killer.
Yeah.
That it's okay to judge those people.
Well, and the system didn't. They were like,
Yeah.
You've done all these bad things. Go ahead and bond out. And then killed more. Oh, holy cow. Sorry. That's fresh, guys. So you mentioned President Bush and some quotes. The other ad hominem I see a lot, and I'm interested how this is going to play out. People with good quotes, good ideas, things that very Instagrammable quotes,
yes,
have done bad things.
Yes.
They might be bad people.
Yes.
So now how do I balance this ad hominem that I live with, where it's like, okay, I don't support this person's political decisions,
right.
or it came out that this person beat their spouse, but man, this quote is solid and great.
And I've run into that in the past. I've posted a quote from somebody, and I get these responses. This person did this. They're a war criminal. They're blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay. But
I'm not telling you to go be like him.
I didn't tell you to support this person. I didn't tell you that I didn't even make a judgment on this person.
Mm-hmm.
I am posting this quote because I think there is power in these words. Anything beyond that is you attaching emotion to it.
Yeah.
That is wholly on you. I'm not making a blatant endorsement for somebody just because I use one of their quotes. The things that they've done in their life outside of this quote don't change the words in the quote, And
if you don't want to use that quote because you don't appreciate the person and that's how you want to do it, okay, you're going to run out of people in quotes, yes. I promise.
And also just scroll on, man. Life's too short.
Yeah, it's interesting, the people who want to, and maybe it's from a good place, like hey, did you know that this is a terrible human? Yeah, but again, this is a great quote.
Right.
I want to move on to, I think we're going to be able to get the two more fallacies that I have that I at least want to get to.
Okay.
And we're going to look at the fallacy of composition, assuming
I don't know this one.
So this was one that I told you I looked up that list of fallacies, the internet, and I was like, wow, this is so many. And then I found just a way to start filtering them down. And I just sat in the car while we were driving somewhere with Ryan, and I was like, have you heard of this one? Have you heard of this one? Have you heard of this one? And I did find a couple that weren't too familiar to him, that I thought would still be, that weren't out in the weeds. I mean, some of these fallacies are wild, not explainable in person.
Yeah. The
fallacy of composition is assuming that something true of part of a whole must be true of the whole. And we got this on Facebook, I believe. An individual commented that cops are the worst self-defense guys.
Oh, yeah.
And while I will say, I'm sure there are some cops that are terrible self-defense guys. And there are. That doesn't mean every cop is the worst.
Right. It's okay.
Whew.
So yeah, I mean, you get both ends of this spectrum. You will get people that automatically assume that because someone was a cop, they must know about self-defense and fighting.
Yes.
And then you get this guy that's on the other end. Well, because someone was a cop, they make the worst self-defense instructors. And the reality is neither one of those things is wholly true.
Right.
I do think there's a tendency to give, from a large portion of the population, to give more credence to someone that had some sort of position of authority in another field, and to give them more credence in a new field. I do think there's a tendency to want to do that. And
that's a logical fallacy.
Yes. And there may be some reason to do it based on how closely related these fields are.
People harp on the word assumption.
Yeah.
But the reality is we do have to take some educated risks and try to connect the dots ourselves. I mean, that's how the brain works, is we look for patterns in our lives and what we know about things that are true and we have confirmed from our experiences, and then try to extrapolate them in these new situations.
If you're not making assumptions in your daily life, you're not getting anything done.
No.
Because you will have to question to death every little move that you make, every little thing, every little task, whatever. Assumptions are like stereotypes. They are shortcuts. They exist for a reason. They allow me to, and sometimes I'm going to get it wrong.
Yes.
But if I'm getting it right 95% of the time, that other 5%, okay, I figure it out, I move on. If I'm not doing that, I'm not getting anything accomplished, anything done. It's so this one, it's what is it called?
Fallacy of Composition.
Composition. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That I do think this one probably happens a lot, and we just don't, or I didn't know there was a name for it.
Yeah. It happens a lot outwardly and then internally. Yeah. It's one thing to spot these in an argument on Facebook or sitting around a table having a conversation, but to catch yourself in your own fallacies, that's a whole nother level. Again, being aware of your narrative identity and your internal dialogue and those sorts of things to realize, wait a second, that wasn't sound logic.
Right. This is probably where you get into, for better or worse, good or bad, because again, life is in the gray. This is probably where you start getting into profiling and things like that. Because one thing, one piece of an organization, a group, a religious type, a race, whatever, is one way, then the entire entity must be that way. So, and look, just like assumptions, just like stereotypes, profiling, when done with logic and reason, has a place.
Sound logic and sound reason. Yeah. It's so difficult.
It has a place.
Yeah.
It's a shortcut.
Yes.
It allows us.
It's a time saver. It allows us to make action.
Yeah. Right. But it can't be the sole driver of how I make decisions. Just like stereotypes can't be, or assumptions can't be.
I took a logic and proofs class, and it's through the math department, so I'm not going to bog you down in details. Good. But essentially, it's how we create an axiom, a template of sorts to decide if something is true or not. And it's pretty easy to show if it's not true all the time. You have to find one exception and you're good to go. The difficulty is something that is true all the time, proving that.
Yeah.
And the want is almost to be like, well, look at all of these things that work. Surely it's fine.
Right.
But to really prove it was a lot of effort that I did not master. And I cannot explain. That was a long time ago. But it's, if you do think, well, this is true of the part, it might be true of the whole, you should be doing a lot of research to really solidify that conclusion.
Well, I'm saying it might be. That's okay.
Well, yeah.
Saying it is, that's a whole other thing. And the truth is, like, again, I've said it a couple times already, most of life is not black
and white absolutes, always, never.
It's just not. We say all the time, or with some regularity, not all the time, always and never, when it comes to the fighting, violence, or lies. As soon as I start putting things in these nice, clean boxes, anything that works outside of that becomes a detriment to the person that is having to do something with this information. If I've been programmed to think this is always, this is never, and that's not true, because it's not, then once we get outside of that as a human who has been trained a certain way, I have a tendency to kind of short circuit, kind of bog down.
If you even can acknowledge it.
Yeah.
You will just deny because this is what I know.
Yeah.
Insert whole religious conversation. Skip that. Moving on. Correlation is not causation. And I think this ties really closely with what we were talking about, especially when we look at a whole. So I'm going to give you an example I created based off of a structure that you would see on like an SAT type questioning to judge your critical reasoning. I know. I'm going to keep it short though. So let's say we realize more martial artists have ADHD than athletes in other sports.
Okay.
And so in terms of answer choices, you might be thinking, well, martial arts must cause ADHD.
Right.
Right. But then you come across an answer that tells you, hey, martial arts is recommended for people with ADHD to help them deal with symptoms, manage whatever it is. And so the reason, probably more likely, that more martial artists have ADHD than other athletes is because it was heavily recommended regularly. And I picked that one because it still is pretty common for us to have parents come in. They think their kid is early stages ADHD, and they were told, I heard martial arts is good for this. But there's this correlation causation that if we don't dig into more details, we'll miss. More martial artists have ADHD. Well, martial arts must cause ADHD.
Right. That's interesting because just this morning I was scrolling through Instagram between sets. That's the productive way to do things. But I happened upon a post. There was a series of slides about a Finnish study on the effects of sauna use. And my confirmation bias drew me to it because of all these ice bath people.
Sure.
So I'm like, sweet. This is going to be a study that's going to work to my favor.
Advantage,
Okay. And so, and I'm not even going to try to state the numbers, but basically it was saying, look, people that were using a sauna 1 to 2 times a week had this percentage reduction in these cardiac issues, blah, 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 whatever. People that were using it 3 to 4 times a week had an even greater percent, on and on and on.
So it looks like sauna use is going to help reduce.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm scrolling through it and I'm like, man, I mean, this sounds awesome. Suck it, Janetti. And then as I kind of went on to lifting and started thinking about it more, it's like, and I don't know how in depth the study went.
Sure.
It's Instagram slides, So I started thinking, well, okay, but who has access to a sauna?
Mm-hmm.
Who has the time to get in a sauna 4 times a week? Things like that. How much influence does that have on? Because somebody that's doing that probably is more affluent than not. Probably is relatively fit. You're probably doing a sauna after a workout.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not, but probably.
Yep.
And so if I just take on face value these slides, well, getting in a 174 degree room 4 times a week is going to make my cardiovascular system 40% less likely to shut down on me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I did no other research on it, and I start recommending to people, they're putting you on heart meds. I know you're 45 pounds overweight. Just go to the sauna. Just go to the sauna. They probably have one at the Y. So yeah, I just read that this morning. Which I thought was interesting. And again, my confirmation bias is what drew me to it because of these dumb ice bath things.
So I came across an interesting, I guess I'll call it a logical fallacy, but it really heavily moves into the confirmation bias, which is on the cognitive bias side. It's supposed to be a pattern of thinking. And that's the false consensus effect. Have you heard of this one?
No, I don't think so.
It's pretty self.
Words are hard.
Words are so hard right now. What am I trying to say?
I don't know. Maybe try
it describes itself. How about that? False consensus effect. It describes itself. But essentially, it's the tendency for people to believe that their own opinions and beliefs are more common in others than they actually are.
Yeah.
Because I believe this thing, probably most people do believe it as well. And that leads you into these types of studies, which again, probably start with you thinking, well, this is what I believe. Let me go out and prove that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And social media is really good about making sure you see a whole lot of people thinking that way.
Exactly.
And look, I'm not I know I dog social media a lot. We use it. It's a necessary part of being fruitful and productive in a capitalistic endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we've built. That's the society that we've created.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's all bad. However, if you don't realize and you don't understand that this is what is happening and this is how social media companies make their money, then it is and can be a real problem. If you think a certain way and you do a search about that thing, and then for the next day or two, you see more and more people saying the same stuff, more and more posts and shares about this study and that study, and then you click on those, and now your entire feed is full of that one side. And so it validates
This false consensus effect.
yes, and it just perpetuates, you know. And if you don't know that's how things work, then it can be a real problem. It's if you only watch, and I don't watch any of these things, okay? So full disclosure. If you only watch MSNBC or you only watch Fox News,
Yeah.
you are going to have a predisposition to think a certain way. You went into it already thinking that way.
Yes.
And then this just supports that way of thinking. And it's going to be really rare for you to get an opposing thought process on whatever, you know, it is that you're trying to validate. And that's dangerous, you know, and social media companies, advertisers, marketers, probably, not to get too conspiratorial, but probably other governments rely on this. You know, it's how we are able to manipulate a populace to buy a thing or to protest a thing or to act violently in certain ways.
Yeah.
It's I think on a lot of levels, it's how we as people are being manipulated to do whatever it is that some entity is trying to get us to do, whether it's buying a thing or whether it's, you know, hating a side, thinking a side is wholly bad and out to do harm to kids or whatever it is. Right. And if we don't acknowledge that this exists, that this is a thing, then it's really easy to fall into this.
We talked about our hesitancy to really take anything at face value, especially with the prevalence of AI now.
I hate sharing anything.
Yeah.
That I know wasn't produced by us or somebody that I know. I hate sharing stuff because I'm like, I don't know if this is real or not. Right. I don't know if this is true or not. And if I search it, then my whole feed is going to be full of just that. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, I understand. Do you think the phrase unbiased media is real?
No.
Is there
the phrase
truly,
is real.
Well, is there anything truly unbiased? No. Is there truly media?
No, because if I don't care who you are, and I don't care how open-minded you are and how much you understand that there are multiple sides to an issue, a topic, a problem, whatever. We all carry biases. And no matter how hard, and as a matter of fact, the harder we try to ignore those biases and the harder we try to fight those biases, may even, if we're talking about media. So if I was going to do a news story on a topic that I felt a certain way about, and I went out of my way to represent the other side, the other spectrum, well, now I'm just creating a new bias. Yeah. As opposed to just reporting what is. I feel a certain way about bedtime Deadpool, you know, and because I know I feel that certain way, I am going to take extra effort and care to make sure that I represent the other side. Well, I shouldn't be representing any side. I should just be reporting what is.
Well, and the reality is no one watches that media because someone sits there and says, this is a red figure. It has a gray robe, a panda, and unicorn slippers. Yes. Everybody's like, okay, I'm bored out of my mind.
The old tagline used to be for newspapers, if it bleeds, it leads. So if it's bloody, if it's exciting, if it's gory, if it's controversial, whatever, then that goes to the top of the page because that's what people want to consume.
Yes.
And so if you tried to make a media company that literally just reported events, I don't think it would last a week.
Nope. No. I see that in myself. We do need a sort of bias. We need those catches, those hooks. That's just part of what, again, we've established a society that's how you get our attention.
Look at our industry. If I put out a video about arm drags, it'll get like 12 people watching it.
Mm-hmm.
If I put out a video of an arm drag into a flying triangle,
yeah,
it'll blow up.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm not faulting anybody. I'm acknowledging that this is
a necessary evil.
The reality of the world we live in.
This is very much the quote, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it.
Yeah.
What is happening, what is going on is so very little compared to how you interact with those things.
Yeah. It's, again, and we've touched on this in other episodes. I truly have very little control over anything outside of my direct actions,
Yes.
And the control that I do have outside of my actions is how I respond to the things not in my control.
Right.
And so it's like, I think it was the last episode where we talked about accountability and how, sometimes you can get caught up in this loop of the world is against me, blah, 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 whatever. It's a similar vein, It's not that the world is against me. It's my perception of the things that are happening. And if I take a stoic kind of approach to it, and you have this flow chart, and it's what's happening. Is it something that I can do something about? Yes. Okay, do that.
Do that.
No. Okay, move the fuck on.
Yeah.
Like what?
Why are we wasting our time
but
exerting energy on it?
We all spend inordinate amount of time and energy, which is finite. We will not be here forever on things that we cannot not only not control, but not even really affect.
Yeah.
And one, it can be toxic, it can be caustic, it can kind of eat away at us. But two, it takes away from the things and the people that are truly important and that we can actually do something about. And again, like social media is really good at drawing people into these kinds of things. Social media thrives on it, honestly. Like it needs it, it needs to be fed a daily dose of engagement, and it wants you to engage in things that get you riled up, that get you fired up.
Yep. For better or worse.
For better or worse. Yeah. Because it, again,
the supportive side or
it doesn't care.
Side. Doesn't matter. Nope. Engagement is engagement. And that's how you're part of the machine.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave us with an important correlation to consider.
Okay.
As the number of pirates has decreased, global warming is going up. So if you're concerned about global warming, encourage more people to be pirates, and we should be good to go on that.
I mean, I was already doing that.
Perfect.
Not necessarily for the global warming part, but now I'll make sure to include
Double
that in
down
the flyer.
On it. Oh, perfect. Good. All right. We've got our pirate things coming up. Okay. Before we end this episode, I want to say that we are officially launching some really cool Second Plan A memorabilia of sorts, stickers, buttons. We're going to do a really limited offer for some magnets, and we're going to
limited like 10.
Yeah, 10. There's not a lot.
10 of them.
So all of that is coming out on Friday. So if you made it to the end of this podcast, make sure to set an alarm, set a reminder to head back to our channel on Friday. We're going to release it, launch it, give you first access.
Yeah, these are designs based on phrases that have kind of been touch points for people in previous episodes, things that, one of us has said that kind of really hit home with people. And so we kind of plucked those phrases and we made a couple of stickers and buttons, and then, a very limited edition magnet. And there's more art in the queue to do more different ones, but let's see how these do first.
I'm pretty excited about them. If you want absolute first access, go to secondplana.com. Fill in the little information section so that you're added to our email list. You'll get absolute first access. The rest of you people who aren't interested in being a part of the machine and are just going to come back to Instagram on your own will, seems ridiculous.
That's weird.
I know, it doesn't seem right. You'll see it when you see it. So that's our look at trapped thinking, navigating common logical fallacies. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, keep it to yourself. Stay off of social media. Go on with your life as usual. Again, that's the best thing that you should do. If you did enjoy this podcast...
It's not the best thing you should do. The best thing you should do is enjoy the podcast.
Okay, fair.
And then do what she's about to say now.
That's true. So listen again, enjoy it, choose to enjoy it. Put that in your control. If you did enjoy this discussion, please leave us 5-star reviews, turn on downloads on Spotify, follow, share, subscribe, join the conversation on social media. It all helps us out so much, and we're so appreciative of you guys as listeners. So thanks for being a part of Second Plan A, and we look forward to growing with you next time.
And we just gave them a false dichotomy there. You either really enjoyed it or you didn't.
That's true. What's everybody else in the middle going to do? Everybody else in the middle, choose that you enjoyed it.
Yes.
That's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.